To join a frequency that will open your mind, expand your heart, and activate your spirit. Thank you for joining Kelly Meehan, Spirit Baby Medium and Master Energy Therapist. Kelly believes in the power of the Spirit Baby. She speaks with babies in spirit before life, in the womb, and after life. She supports, teaches, and guides others to tune into the intuitive and mystical parts of life for greater wisdom. Join her in meeting your soul baby and build your connection and relationship with deep love and trust. Welcome to Spirit Baby Radio with your host, Spirit Baby Medium, Kelly.
Welcome to episode 86, April 24th, 2020, Enhancing and Harmonizing a Fertility Journey Towards Pregnancy. How can you bring new energy to your fertility? What ways can yoga provide a deepening towards creating a baby? What healing techniques can you start today? I have a special guest today. My special guest episode is Zahra Haji. She's a yoga goddess. She created the first online fertility yoga meditation program, which is practiced by women in over 25 countries. The Moon Goddess Cycle, Harmonizing Fertility Enhancing Practice has helped over 50,000, that's probably more than that, 50% of her clients conceive. Zahra is also a registered psychotherapist and women's reproductive health and fertility coach, helping women address the often left out psychological, emotional aspects of infertility. Thank you, Zahra, for being here.
Thanks, Kelly, for having me.
I love this because I feel like I'm always like, where do my special guests come from? And I feel like you've been around. It's like we kind of like know each other, but we've never actually kind of met. And that does happen. That does happen quite often with a lot of my guests, like what the relationships that we kind of built and connect with. And so this is really great because I believe out of all my episodes, I'm trying to think right now and reflect for a moment because I don't think we really ever talk about yoga, which is like kind of, especially with fertility and pregnancy. And I know that I love yoga, and I know that most people love yoga. Like, I don't know anyone that really doesn't like it. But I do have to share, when I was pregnant with my first born, my son, I was doing Kundalini, maybe because Kundalini yoga is a kind of more intense, and it was a very spiritual opening, that when I became pregnant, I couldn't go. I was like, I'm like, nope, I'm not doing anything. I just felt, I think because I had such severe nausea, and it was very it was my first pregnancy. I felt very alone. I didn't have a lot of family, and I just felt like all the yoga that I loved, I had to just shut it down. And now that I reflect with it, I probably could have done some, maybe if I had more support, it could have been just sit there and breathe, Kelly. That would have been good.
Right.
Right. But I'd love to hear more about, how yoga, I'm curious, what does that look like when you're on a fertility journey? Are there certain movements and meditations that you have seen that really enhance that connection to the body and also to baby energy as well?
Yeah, so my practice specifically is actually a Kundalini yoga practice. So funny that you bring up Kundalini yoga. And Kundalini yoga is, as you know, really powerful energetically. And it harnesses what I refer to as Mata Shakti, which is the mother energy of creation. And when, in my practice, in the Moon Goddess yoga and meditation practice, what we're doing is we're combining the power of Kundalini yoga with the, hip opening and blood flow circulating, sort of warm-up exercises or poses of Hatha yoga and the wisdom of women's menstrual cycles and the moon cycles. And so it's a blending of all of these wisdom traditions that women are so often disconnected from. So few women even know that their menstrual cycles are a mirror reflection of the moon cycle. And in a bigger picture, our menstrual cycles are also a reflection of the seasons and of the changes of the earth itself. So we are the embodiment of the feminine in physical form, like in human form, And that's reflected back to us again and again through nature. But so many women have no idea about this. So when a woman who's on the fertility journey is only focused on ovulation as a time of like, oh my God, we have to do it. We have to make a baby now. And then when her period comes and she feels failure and defeat and disappointment, then this sets up a really negative feedback cycle with in relationship to her womb and her menstrual cycle. So one of the big things that I focus on in the Moon Goddess program is to take that focus off, optimize or harness, the opportunity of ovulation and force sex to happen, and then feel disappointed when the period comes, and start to reestablish a new relationship with the menstrual cycle and all 4 phases of it. And that's where the reflection of the moon and the seasons really helps us to understand how, just like the seasons, if you live somewhere with 4 seasons, it's easier to understand that our period time is like the winter. It's when, life kind of slows down. We go inward. We don't really want to be outside because it's cold. We want to curl up under a blanket, by a fire and just rest and be embraced and taken care of. And then when the springtime comes, we feel this bounce of energy. We feel excitement, enthusiasm, which is pre-ovulation once your period is over, and the follicle-stimulating hormone starts to rise, and estrogen starts to rise in the body, and we feel that peppy awakening, just like when the buds of green start popping up in springtime. And then we move into autumn, when the leaves start falling off the trees and the earth starts to kind of darken, days start getting shorter, and we start to feel that preparation for winter. And that's premenstruation, where we start to feel our energies withdrawing. We start to feel a slowing down. A lot of women fight that, and so PMS is really rampant for so many women, because instead of going with the flow, we fight against it. And then with menstruation, again, we cycle back to that dark moon energy of the new moon. The moon is invisible, but it's still there. So the menstrual cycle is a reminder that there's hope. That cycle starts again. We feel that re-energization, and that hopefulness always comes back once we cycle into the next fresh cycle. And the new moon, or the dark moon, is a really beautiful metaphor that we know the moon is there, we just can't see it, right? It's because of where we are in Earth's rotation, but that doesn't mean that there's only darkness, that light is coming. So there's so many beautiful metaphors that we can start to harness and use to understand and deepen our connection with what I call our goddess energies. And the moon becomes a really beautiful metaphor. So in the menstrual phase, it's the wise woman, the energy of the crone, again, of winter, of darkness, of stillness, of going inside. And then the maiden comes in the springtime, and she's the youthful time of how we feel during adolescence, how we feel when we're single. There's that bubbling energy. And then motherhood, in the sort of where the full moon comes in, and abundance and fertility, and that sense of expansion and growth, summertime. The radiance of the full moon helps us to connect with that radiance inside of us. And then that withdrawal, the waning moon of us kind of turning inward and darkening, and the enchantress energy of kind of the witch, the magical witch. enchantment, but also, you know, it's a wild energy, it's unpredictable, and we need to kind of work with it so that we can harness it and it doesn't work against us. So there's all these ways to work with our cycle and our energies that we often have zero idea about, and that's a really big part of my program.
That is it's so true about the cycles. I love how it's like the, excuse me, the connecting to nature and looking at the seasons. And I live in a place that doesn't have a very strong season, but you can still be found. We joke in California, Southern California, that it's fire season, mudslide season, a little bit of rain, but you could still feel, and I grew up in New Jersey, so I'm very familiar with seasons, but you could still, I feel like you can still captivate it here very much so. And when you were speaking about that, it reminded me of two things. One is my moon cycle. I call it my moon instead of a period or menstruation. I always say, oh, my moon's here, or I'm on my moon. And it just feels so much more loving to do that. And there is something that we see a lot in most cultures is like this misunderstanding between the relationship of the female body and the organs. It's like a lot of women feel like they're working against them, or they just weren't really taught about that. And I'm one of those people too. And I'm going, oh, what's the cervix? What's this chart? What is all this stuff? You know, and then having to, you know, go into conception, really just not knowing what's supposed to happen or what the body is meant to do. And I'm sure women, you know, as you've seen, as I have, you know, going month after month and just questioning. And I love how you said it. I can really feel the energy that you were saying. It felt very smooth. Like, it's not about like getting to the finish line. Like, okay, yes, you want to conceive, but there's a process with some, you know, with most of us to really deepen and look at that emotional and spiritual piece to go, okay, what does that next step look like for that individual, right? Because everybody is in such a different cycle. And another thing you said it reminds me of is when I, with my friends, I host these like little goddess groups, or I call them sisterhood groups. And every time I create an altar, I like the altar to reflect our elements. And so I was going, oh, what am I going to do for winter? And I had this beautiful, it was in December, and I played this beautiful song by St. Lucia, and it's like, it was so gorgeous. And I put out ice. I actually got a bowls of ice around the altar of the goddess, and I put salt, and I wanted things to reflect snow and ice and cold, and even crystals that looked like it would be more wintry. And now, of course, now we're in spring, and I have wheat, which is probably more harvesting time, but I have green and butterflies and eggs, and I'm like, oh, there's something I feel that's like really nice to kind of, you know, as you're saying that I'm very visual. And so I set up my little altar space very visual, and of course now in this wild time that we're in, I change the altar every few days, and like, where is my emotional space now? What do I need from, you know, to worship, to feel a connection to my own, you know, inner kind of spirit. And so I really like, you know, that rhythm. But I would love to hear, you know, I'm sure you get a lot of women that are going through IVF. Yeah. And how does, you know, I'm sure that it looks somewhat similar. Maybe it's a little different. Maybe I don't really know. You know, how would a practice of yoga be different for someone in IVF? Is there a difference?
Well, I think, so the difference mainly, right, is that now you're on a medicated cycle, and IVF means you're zeroing in on one particular cycle, right? So from my perspective, ideally you want to spend, and you'll hear this from many different experts in holistic fertility, that you want to give yourself a lead time of 90 days in an ideal world. Because it takes 90 days for that one egg, you know, to make it down to be ready to come out of the fallopian tubes. But when we're doing IVF, we're not looking for just one egg. We're looking for a whole cohort of eggs. So the more blood flow and circulation you can get to the reproductive organs, the more optimized your pituitary gland function can be, and that hypothalamus, ovarian, pituitary axis can be working, the Moon Goddess program really works at a physical level on all those aspects and elements, so that, we've seen with women who have been going through fertility treatments like over years, they see their FSH drop, for example. In some cases, I've even seen AMH numbers go up, which, scientifically there could be a lot of arguments, but, I've seen it from clients of mine. And the idea is that you're giving yourself time to actually harmonize with your own body's process, get out of that fight with yourself around my body's not doing what I want, but to create that sense of like cooperation and partnership and working together, right? Because ultimately IVF now brings in a lot more people to work with. So now we have to work with drugs, injections, follicle stimulation, doctors, ultrasounds, lab technicians. Like there's so many people involved. So I feel that the first relationship, though, is between you and you, like you and your body. And when you bring that into the best feeling place you can, then when you bring other people in, at least you are in alignment with yourself, right, and your womb. That heart-womb connection is so, so crucial. And when you've gone through years of infertility, of treatments not working, or cycles without pregnancy or miscarriage, the heart is broken. Like, let's just, that's just how it is. And so in Chinese medicine, there's this idea called, it's a term called Bao Mai, and it means it's called the uterine connection between heart and womb. And when there's a lot of grief in the heart, the idea is that it blocks connection to the womb. And so I believe it's really important to create this harmony, to establish this new experience of you in relationship to your womb and your cycle, so that when you go into IVF, again, you're going in a better place, which is, there's even studies that have shown that women who are in a state of positive affect when they're going into IVF, the study actually says you're 90% more likely to succeed in your IVF cycle. They even see better results in terms of yield of eggs when someone is in a positive affect state. So much of how you feel determines what your outcome is going to be, right? So there's that piece. But in terms of the actual yoga practice, part of it is it makes it easier for egg retrieval when the organs of your uterus, like surrounding your uterus, so in your pelvis, feel supple, and they feel like there's more blood flow, because a lot of women feel really tight and bound up in the pelvis, especially if you're sitting all day or you drive a lot, and most of the time is sitting. The pelvis takes all of that congestion, literally. So the yoga practice and walking, which is really important, opens up the blood flow and circulation to the pelvis. And when you do egg retrieval, it'll be easier. It's less painful. There's less blood, like bleeding afterwards, and you don't feel as much discomfort even during the procedure. And ideally, you have better quality eggs, depending on how much preparation you do before your IVF. And for women who don't have lead time, just feeling like they have something that they're doing that feels good and that's in their control, like in their hands. Even I've had women who've just done it, like literally as they're starting IVF, and just that feeling of I can do something to make myself feel better, to make my body feel like more flow and receptivity and energy, and it's something that is in my control, was a huge factor in them feeling like they're doing, their part. as opposed to sitting on, on the internet and Googling incessantly and reading different people's experiences on, 100 different forums, and exchanging stories. Like, instead of doing that every day for 2 hours, you can, go on the mat, meditate, do yoga, and you can do it, in less time even. So just a 15-minute practice daily can make such a difference in your physical experience, in your mental, emotional experience, that I think that's a incredibly worthwhile investment when the stress of infertility is only second to cancer in terms of the psychological impact. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That's that's big, and I didn't know that about the psychological impact of it. But even as you're speaking, I'm just kind of, tuning into even some of my clients that, some of them, they can get very obsessive about all the information. And you make a really good point. It's like, instead of just trying to really control in the fear thought process is how I would see it, looking and seeing all these stories. It's like, where are you in your body as an individual, as an energy of consciousness with this human suit? And how can you begin to, move into it? And I know that pelvic floor, we all have so much congestion in that pelvic floor. And you're right, we sit all the time. I mean, what else that's how our bodies are. But I know that I have my own stuff in my pelvic floor after the births of my children that I'm going, where is my pelvic floor now? And how do I bring that? I love how you said that blood flow, just that movement. And there's, I've been studying more about the hips because of my own stuff, but I'm going, wow, there's a lot going on down there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of tissues and fascia and joints and muscles, and it's like, and the bones, and it's like any little thing, or the nerves, anything gets tweaked or kind of shifted, it really just changes your mood. It changes just how your body feels, and it makes so much sense to say, just, move into a practice instead of, getting obsessive and Googling all these stories of whether they're negative or whether they're miraculous, because who are you in that? Like, where are you? Like, this is where, I know that the yoga practice, of course, can definitely take women. And so what about women? We talk about conception and reproduction, which I know is like an ongoing, we could talk about that for days and hours, but I want to hear a little bit, even like, how would you bring a practice into pregnancy? And I'm sure it's, it's changed depending on what trimester you're at. But what would that be like for women? Is it similar, do you feel, or would it be different, the way you kind of bring that kind of moon goddess experience?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing that, obviously changes is you no longer are cycling through your own body. But what's beautiful is that women never stop cycling. So whether you're pregnant, whether you're in menopause, whether you're just complete with that part of your life, like if you've had a hysterectomy, whatever, we still, as female beings, continue to cycle energetically and be influenced by the moon. So if you think about it, the tide is influenced by the moon, right? Mm-hmm. So as women, we're even more deeply synced up with the lunar energy. So as a pregnant woman, you could also continue to notice how you feel in relationship to the phases of the moon, which is a fascinating practice. As women, we're always emotionally changing, right? And that's, for a lot of women, as a young woman, like when I was a young woman who just stumbled into this information, what struck me the most was, wow, I thought I was crazy because I was continuously changing my emotional state all the time. And that was really distressing because that's the reflection that we get from the medical community, from, a lot of men in general. Women are crazy. Women's emotions are so unpredictable. We can't understand them. And that's because we don't understand the cyclical nature of the feminine. And then again, we can come back to the seasons. We can come back to the moon's phases. We are changing. We change literally every week. And we cycle from darkness to light every week, each phase of the cycle. So the first part of the cycle in pre-ovulation and ovulation is more of the light of our cycle, where estrogen is climbing and there's this sense of like growing and abundance. And then there's that turning inward and darkness of pre-menstruation and menstruation that for a lot of people it doesn't feel good because it's a darkening, because we're not used to that slow down, turn inward reflection feeling. We like go, produce, happy. And the dark part of our cycle isn't those things. It's other things that you can find positivity in as well, if you allow yourself to kind of melt in and drop in and lean into what the darkness has for you. And there's mystery in that. There's it can be scary too. And pregnancy, for a lot of women is a huge rite of passage, especially childbirth is an enormous rite of passage. And so you have these 40 weeks, right, of this deepening spiritual experience of yourself as this powerful being connected to the divine, right, that's literally creating a life from a mass of cells. There's so much opportunity there to feel your power. And a yoga practice that harnesses the energy of Mata Shakti, literally the mother energy of creation, connects you to that divine feminine power, which in order to birth without fear, and ideally when we have less fear, we have less pain, because we can kind of, again, melt into the experience instead of bracing against. Contractions are powerful waves of energy, and they're meant for us to surrender. If you don't know what surrender feels like in your regular existence, it's really hard to surrender to the power of a contraction. And so the yoga practice can really help us to tune into that vibration of the divine feminine. And women have been birthing babies, since the beginning of time. And so many women have never had pain and fear over the, millennia that we've been having childbirth. But in the last 100 years, with the medicalization of childbirth, there's a lot of fear, but there's also a lot of disconnection from our bodies and from the feminine in general. So again, coming back to a yoga practice that reconnects you to the divine feminine helps us sort of tune into that wisdom of like the beginning of time. Like your body is designed to do this, and if you can tune in and connect to that, then that flow of energy is what will help that, birth be a much more sacred and like liberating, empowering experience, right? That as a mother, I'm sure you're familiar with, even if you toggle back and forth in your birthing experience between like intense fear and pain, and then you toggle into the surrender and like the power of it, it's profound. It's a profoundly life-changing experience. Definitely,
birth is definitely a life-changing experience on so many different levels, and each birth is different.
Exactly.
Some women are in hospitals or birth centers or home births. I know for me, my first birth wasn't very desirable, but there's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of history, let's say. And then the second time, I was quite scared, and I had to deal with a lot of homeopathic remedies because I can feel my body had this fear that it was going to happen again, the first experience. And my mind was like, what are you talking about? But it was like it was like there was this kind of separation. And then there's a lot of crying and a lot of processing. And I joked that my midwives and my doula were like my really psychotherapists. That's all I needed, because it's like, I do know how to birth, but it was just so much stuff in the way. And it is very interesting, the in-between surrender. And my birth was different because I was at home, so I didn't have any medication, so I got to feel really high in between the contractions. Like I felt like it reminded me of my old days of taking ecstasy, to be honest.
Yeah.
I was like, what is this? And I didn't realize, like, you know, and especially in the early contractions where it felt like, you know, very bearable. And then I did a lot of bouncing on the ball, which was very, very helpful for me.
Right.
It helped me get through the whole entire thing. I needed to bounce my energy. And to me, and I even wrote about it, there was actually, you know, people talk about orgasmic birth. I actually did have that sensation probably right before I was ready to push, and I guess it would be maybe second stage of like labor, but it was like really weird. I was like, whoa, what's happening? And I stopped heavy breathing. And there probably was a moment of surrender. I was in this dark, sweet environment in my home, and I had a few people that loved me just sitting there with their eyes closed. It wasn't like they were watching me.
Yeah.
They were just listening to their own rhythm. And, of course, then the pushing comes, and that's where I had a lot more ungrounded energy at moments. But I also have history in my pelvic floor, so it was like working with that is important. But even as you say, on a massive, like, scale, like what is, you know, and it's such a, you know, an expansive and deepening conversation is that the impact of birth culturally and globally, there is a disempowerment with women, and we see it all the time, and it's ongoing. And it's interesting because the creative force of life is so incredible, because it's like this is what brings people into this world, and we treat it so poorly. There's no like listening to the rhythm of an individual's body to birth the way that they need to. And, you know, of course it should be more rare. There is intervention, but it's more opposite. It's almost like intervention is the given these days without, you know, I feel like that's why most people are home birthing, is because a lot of us feel like we won't be heard in a setting, in a hospital. And it's a lot of energy to me in a hospital. Like that's a lot of stuff happening there. And birth is like, you ever see cats and dogs? They go hide. Animals, they go into their little box, and they go under a table and go into the closet, and they kind of work it out, because you have to work it out. Like there's, you know, that's just the reality of it. But there's a few other things you said I wanted to kind of go back to. And, you know, I really love this because I feel like this is so helpful for those that are kind of tuning in. It's just that the moon, how it's, you know, looking at the moon. And I have to share, which I've shared this before, and I thought it was really interesting. When I do a circle, and if I do it on a new moon and versus a full moon, it's such a different vibe. The women are so different. And I did this in 2019. I started a group monthly with a few of these moms. It got to the point where everybody wanted to come because it was such a beautiful synergy in this group and what we were creating, what we were doing. And so I started to tell them if they noticed and then they were like, oh, I never thought about that. But when there's a full moon, it's really hard for the women to come down from that. It's like they're over-energized. And I have to be really careful on how I close the group. If the group isn't fully closed at the end, people just are like bouncing around on caffeine at like midnight, right? And then the new moon, the darker, like, the new moon, to me, a lot of people won't show up. Either they're sick or they're going into whatever their cave is. And when they do show up, it's a very easy close. People are just kind of more, I feel like, introspective a bit, you know. I don't know if you noticed that, but I do notice that with the group even. But even myself, I know when there's a full moon, because I don't know about you, but I get very energized where I can't sleep. Like I'm like laying in bed staring at the ceiling going, this is weird. And I was like, wait, where's the moon?
Yep. And so, that's the energy, depending on a woman's cycle and how she connects and syncs with the moon. We have different names for those cycles. So, for example, if you're menstruating with a full moon, it means you're on a red moon cycle. You're on a white moon cycle. Wait, let me say that again. I'll start again. If you have your period with the full moon, you're on a red moon cycle. And if you have your period with the new moon, you're on a white moon cycle. So
what does that mean?
Yeah, let me explain. So traditionally, we've acknowledged two different kinds of cycles. a woman who's on a red moon cycle, who menstruates with the full moon, traditionally was considered kind of against the norm, and a woman's life who is more dedicated to healing or midwifery or serving her community in some kind of capacity, like whether spiritual or in a healing capacity, or she was simply, considered a woman who was more like promiscuous and wasn't using her body and her sexuality for reproduction and family life. So this is like an old way of looking at it, right? And the white moon cycle was the cycle of the quote-unquote good mother, a woman who menstruates with the new moon and ovulates with the full moon, is in sync with the fertility of the earth, because the earth herself, like when you plant at full moon, the earth itself is more fertile. And so for example, in Europe, they have something called biodynamic farming, where you can literally, on the label of the food, says biodynamic, which means they planted by the full moon.
Wow.
And so there's this energy to the crop that's in rhythm with the earth's cycle of fertility. So, and traditionally, white moon cycle, the women who cycle with the white moon were considered, quote unquote, the good mother, woman who's focused on, hearth and home, raising a family, devotion to her husband, et cetera, et cetera. And so now, of course, in the modern age, we still have white moon cycle and red moon cycle, but the way I see it is often women who are focused on becoming pregnant, their cycle, especially when they do the Moon Goddess program, I've found over the years, a lot of women's cycle will shift to white moon cycle, almost like a signal that we're getting ready to conceive, or we're in the mindset of this is what we're, focused on in our lives. And then women who are cycling with the full moon, like the period is coming with the full moon, usually it's the archetype of the healer woman or the medicine woman, as I call it. And the focus of her life is less about creation of family and children and motherhood, and more about rebirthing herself in some capacity. Like she is spiritually awakening, or she's healing deep parts of injury, like you kind of alluded to the fact that you have some potentially sexual abuse things that you were processing through birth. So we're always healing, right, in our relationship to the feminine and our female body. And so women whose life are more focused on healing often will be cycling with the red moon cycle. And then recently we've expanded this understanding even further to look at, well, what if you're getting your period with the crescent moon or the waning moon? So we've called that getting your period with the crescent moon the pink moon cycle. And often it's women who are like in this time of really big growth. They're almost being initiated into a new way of being within themselves. It's the energy of the maiden, so there's this like fresh, burgeoning newness, but it's this big, it feels like something big. And then women who are cycling with the waning moon are more in tune with the enchantress energy, and that's often... And so in terms of life cycle, it's about perimenopause, that sense of a big change is coming. There's the sense of like evolution, and a darkening and enchantment and bewitching. So that is often a theme in that person's life, some big transition that feels like an ending and a reinitiation into something else. So I find that depending on the kind of cycle you have, it's indicative of where you're kind of like the the spiritual, energetic focus of your life, it's giving you it's giving you a clue or a signal of what's the overarching theme in terms of your energetic focus, if you know what I mean. And then that does not mean that you can't get pregnant on any of those cycles. So that's really important for people to understand, that there's many women that I've worked with that have conceived on a red moon cycle. It's just a different kind of experience of motherhood. Often those women are still experiencing, like I call infertility the wake-up call of the divine feminine, because I believe that at a very global level, especially now, I mean, we can really understand globally, we're in a pandemic right now, but at a global level, infertility is also a crisis that we're experiencing all over the world. There's nowhere in the world that is excluded from the crisis of infertility. When I was in India in 2011, I could not believe the number of women that would come to my workshops because they had PCOS or like really awful menstrual pain, or, you know, they're trying to conceive, or they had some kind of like difficulty with sexual function. So many different reasons. And so nobody is excluded from no society is excluded from the experience of infertility. It's a global phenomenon. And I believe infertility is the divine feminine's way of saying, hello, women, you cannot be disconnected from your feminine essence anymore. You have to find a way to heal your relationship with your experience of your feminine, whatever that means for you. And for some women, it's through the journey of infertility. For a lot of women, it's through the experience of childbirth. But we need to heal. We need to heal our relationship with the feminine. We need to heal our relationship with the female body. And this is a really big wake-up call for so many women who, for whatever reason, delayed childbearing. There's a myriad of different reasons why we would be delayed in having children, but it means it's giving us the opportunity. We don't just get pregnant in a finger snap anymore. And there's an opportunity in that to do the deep healing work that the feminine is demanding. You know, it's not even it's not a little tap on the door anymore. It's a demand. And the babies that are being birthed from a complete overhaul of your experience and connection to yourself is a very different kind of energetic, I'm sure you know, as a spirit baby medium, a very different energetic, right, of what babies are being birthed onto the planet now than there were 10, 20 years ago. It's a consciousness shift that is profound, and I believe women's consciousness and energy has to rise to meet the level of consciousness and energy of the babies and souls that are coming to this earth.
Yeah, well expressed. I love this energy you talk about the different phases of moon where people are at, and that it's nice to go, okay, oh my gosh, if I can't make the white or the red, where do I exist? You know, it's like, oh, you can, and it makes me curious, like when I conceived my two sons, consciously, like welcoming them, let's do this. I wonder when, like, was it in the red moon cycle? Because those pregnancies were very shadowy. I got stuff kicked up in like 1,000 different ways. It wasn't like I wasn't euphoric and happy the whole time. I felt like another creature has taken over my body. And that was just the way I had to process it. They're both very challenging emotionally and psychologically, and of course physically. But the second time I worked really hard to push against that part. But I do, just listening to what you're saying, is like, where does this new feminine kind of expression of, like, is it the struggle of infertility? Is it the pregnancy? And when you said that, for me, I'm going, oh my gosh, it was the birth. Yeah. And so maybe this is why when I did conceive, I had no fight with the conception. It was like, once I opened space, he showed up, and then the other guy showed up, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is all about me, really. The birthing was the big piece for me. It's like with old energies, with, the mother I had, and then the feminine, it was like the birthing. I did feel like it cracked me open. I always tell people my first son cracked my second chakra open.
Yeah.
But it did. It made me come back to my body. And of course, in a way that felt like trauma, suffering, and tragedy. I'm not going to lie. And I know a lot of women must feel that way with IVF or with their conception. And it did feel like that. And it felt like a dark, shadowy tunnel that I was never moving out of. But I was like, step by step, slowly, I got there, and there was so much healing of my pelvic floor that probably needed to heal 20 years ago or longer. And so now it gets to heal, and it's still in healing, but it's like, I know for me, I'm like, wow, I've never been so rejuvenated around my sensuality and sexuality as a woman. That's not bad or shameful or, or fearful. It's like, oh, yeah, look at, I'm like, this, what is interesting to see, but the perspective of the experience too is that, and you see some women, they have like amazing pregnancies and they're just floating on a cloud and their births are fine. I was like, okay, that's not their thing to kind of crack open and work with on so many levels, because sometimes it's lineage, right? Sometimes it's our mother's 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 mother, however that looks. And you get to see that, and just what you shared about even cross-culturally, going to another country, India, and probably seeing a lot of different, maybe even impoverished, communities and how they meet the needs of their own spiritual awareness, and even in conception and pregnancy. I feel like it's probably very expansive even for you, right? To see the difference between different cultures and how. Even what you shared about infertility, it is a global. It's not just like, oh, it's just you or it's just you. It's more, it's not like you said, like, is there any culture that has zero infertility? I don't know. I mean, does that exist? I mean, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I have people literally all over the world who've reached out to me, from Africa to Argentina. And so from my knowledge, this is everywhere. Infertility is everywhere.
So much great things. I love everything that you're sharing. I feel like this is really helpful for a lot of people. You got me really curious. I'm like, I need to look into this moon thing, because I'm trying to, I'm always trying to be more embodied. Like, how does my cycles move? And I never really noticed to see where the moon was. I think because I got frustrated, because a long time ago someone's like, it's like you're a woman if you bleed on the full moon. But I was like, that was so rare for me. And I'm like, what does that mean then? I'm not a woman. And so I think I had that judgment in my head. And then when you talk about all the different, and I know, like you said, our cycles are always changing. And I've noticed, even in a new year, my cycle is so different. But I do notice that before the moon period, that premenstruation, I notice my body has a consistent emotional and physical energy about it.
Yeah.
And I'm just sitting with the curiosity of it, because I could see how it's like, oh, look, there's a lot of vulnerability. This is a time where if somebody says something, you get really offended or very hurt by it, even though it's very small.
Yeah.
And then I notice even the heat rising. I notice in my pelvic floor up through my body, literally I feel like into my pituitary. I'm like, why is there so much heat? And it feels a little uncomfortable and puffy inside. And I'm just going to be observant of it and try not to judge it or push it. But I'm starting to notice a rhythm in the weeks. And now, again, I'm super curious because now that my moon has changed every single month since the new year, I'm going, what moon is it in? Is it a waning moon? Is it a crescent? Like, what does that, and how can I want to bring that even into my own kind of awareness. Maybe, I know some women have, what do they have, like moon books or charts, right?
Yeah.
I've heard of this, but I don't know enough about it. And then what an empowering thing to do, really. It's do your yoga, your meditation, do your moon, and try not to get obsessive, right? I mean, this is what women in conception do. It's hard to not get obsessive about, am I, peeing on the stick and looking at this test, looking at that test. But, it's like when you're coming back to the body in certain ways and paying attention and moving, I always feel like moving very slow, just to see where's the rhythm and take note of that.
And the other thing, Kelly, just to sort of piggyback on what you're saying, the moon cycle charting practice, and that slowing down to observe what is happening emotionally, what's happening physically, what's happening in your dreams, what's happening sexually, like there. So in our charts that we've created, we track all of those things, dreams to
nice.
your sexual energy to, what's happening mentally, emotionally, physically, cravings, like all these different things that change depending on the phase of where you are in your menstrual cycle, and then we map it back to where the moon is. So there's so many levels of awareness that, like, where you can get curious about what's happening and reflect on what's the symbolism, what's the meaning for you, like what's it trying to tell you. I always used to joke, like, you could go to an astrologer to tell you about yourself, or you could simply track your cycle, because there's so much information that's readily available for you to know and, communicate with if you just take the time to spend, tuning into your body. The information is there ready for you and wanting to be known by you. So the moon cycle charting practice, is so helpful for that self-inquiry and like intimacy with yourself. And then in that deepening relationship with yourself, you become so much more compassionate and understanding and kind and gentle. And then that way of being with yourself translates to how your partner can relate to you, because now he can or she can understand, or they can understand why you're changing, and because of your own deepening relationship with yourself, you can help them understand and be a better partner to you. You can help your children know, mom's going to go into the enchantress phase now, so, if you, can give me some space because I'll be snappy, like I need some time where it's not all about everyone else's needs right now. I'm not good in that right now. And your partner can potentially take some of that over and give you an hour of time where you can just sort of feel broody, and then as soon as you have space, you feel way better. So learning what the different goddess energies are trying to tell you that you need by getting to know the archetypes, but also getting to know the messages of your body, is such an empowering experience that makes you feel so much more in flow with yourself. I don't like the word control, but it gives you the feeling of control. But I think of it more as flowing with your energies instead of fighting against them.
Well, this has been really wonderful to hear all your wisdom and to connect. And I would love for you to share ways that people can contact you, your website or email, and also if there's anything else that you have upcoming that you would like to share for people to know about. Sure.
Thanks, Kelly. So my website, I am in Canada, I'm in Toronto, so the website is yogagoddess.ca. And if you go to the website, you can download my ebook called Fertility Secrets of the Female Body. And in it, it will take you through in kind of like a step-by-step way the 5 steps that I believe, especially if you're experiencing unexplained infertility, how you can start to connect with your body. So, making peace with your period is step 1. Starting to relate to your cycle from an expanded perspective, not just ovulation and menstruation, but all 4 phases. Healing any losses, whether it's miscarriages or years of infertility, how to, look at that trauma and hold it. Also, how Kundalini Yoga and working with your pituitary gland and your reproductive organs can help in the journey of infertility, as well as bringing the joy back into baby making, which can get easily lost when we're going through the journey of trying to get pregnant. So all 5 steps I cover in a 17-page ebook, which is nice and concise. And we're actually, because of, this whole global pandemic that we're in currently, I will be offering 25% off the Moon Goddess program, which we never do. We don't do promotions. But in light of the, these extenuating circumstances, we are going to be extending almost $200 off the program, and it's lifetime access. People come back for second pregnancies. They've come back because they have, so much time at home and there's a pandemic, and it feels good to reconnect to the divine feminine. You never lose access. It's a 12-week journey that we guide you through week by week. There's meditations, there's yoga, there's moon cycle charting. There's a second program called Sensual Magic that's included in the package, which is all about how to bring this knowledge and understanding of your cycle and your goddess energies to your intimate and sexual relationship, not only with your partner but with yourself, and how to navigate your cycle and your sexual energy. So it's a really, holistic package that we include. It also includes a half an hour chat with me to get some personalized attention on your experience and your journey. And yeah, that's about it.
Well, thank you so much for being a guest here on Spirit Baby Radio.
Thank you, Kelly. It's been such a pleasure and honor.
Thank you for joining episode 84, April 24th, 2020, Enhancing and Harmonizing a Fertility Journey Towards Pregnancy. If you like my podcast, please subscribe and leave reviews. Thank you for joining Spirit Baby Radio podcast this week, and please check out my book. It's a journal, Sacred Communication, a Spirit Baby Journal.
This is Spirit Baby Radio. Thank you for joining Kelly in the energy of awareness, love, healing, and soul communication. Please join the next episode at www.soulbabycommunication.com.